Shall we do it? Okay, welcome to the Food Art Film Festival. Welcome to the first event. Um, Welcome to the people online, all the participants that are here, all the speakers of today, welcome, and our colleagues and members of the team. When I feel disoriented, I always ask myself the question, why am I here? This sort of existential question is also a question of belonging somewhere and trying to define the location that you are in. Defining a location is not an easy task by itself. I just had an amazing discussion with one of our advisors, Kabelo Malatsi, who is here at the Jan van Eyck, while having lunch, that even the food that we are having served right now, despite it coming from different local sources, is not local at all. That the Sahara sand, an object that she thinks about a lot, has an influence on the nourishment and taste of the food, which means that nothing is static, everything is in flux. This idea of pantare, something we have discussed earlier at the Jan van Eyck, the term that Heraclitus coined, that means everything flows. And even the way the programming for this edition of Food Art Film Festival came about is a culmination of these different flows coming together like weather patterns. They stem from different minds and bringing minds together. This year's edition looks at the reclamation of taste as an embodiment of processes of solidarity in a coexistence. And as usual, it is situated here at the Jan van Eyck in collaboration and in tandem with our local partners and other events that are going on right now, such as the Maas Festival, of which we are part of. This 3-day festival will bring workshops, excursions, screenings, talks, and most importantly, food. For the first time, we are also organizing a children's program. The Food Art Film Festival is collaboratively organized by the Jan van Eyck Food Lab, the Nature Research Department, the Department for Research and Education, in partnership with the Festival Maas. And just not to forget anyone. And I would like to thank, therefore, Marente, Julia, and Rebecca, who's not here yet, for thinking of and organizing this wonderful festival. Well done, thank you very much. I would like to thank all of our colleagues and all the other labs and departments, the technical staff for making this possible, all the volunteers and interns that have worked on this. I would like also to thank our sponsors for making this event possible, next to the Ministry of Culture, the Province Limburg, Gemeente Maastricht. Furthermore, the Innovatielab, Klik.nl, and the Creative Industry Funds, who help us to make the Future Materials Encounters possible, which will also be part of this festival. The Center for Nature and Environmental Education, the CNMA in Maastricht. Thank you very much for helping us also with the educational program. And all of the speakers and participants and artists that are part of the festival. And in particular, our panel of today, welcome Reinier, welcome Suzi, welcome Barbara online. I mean, we can't see you right now, but you are somewhere. We'll see you in a minute. And also Elisabeth Stroevenfons. So there she is. Oh, no, she's not. Hi, Barbara. You were hiding. Good to see you. Welcome.
Well,
nice to have you.
thank you.
Nice to have you. Thank you for making this possible, that you could join us. So I will give the microphone to Marente. Yes, and have fun. Thank you.
Hi, welcome everybody, and yeah, with the first kickoff of this new festival, 5th edition in Maastricht. If we can start with a technical question, if you could all put your phones on airplane mode, so it doesn't interfere with the recordings, and this year we have reclaiming taste as a theme, as Hicham already said. This came from last year's discussion panel, on which, for one, we had Reinier, who basically inspired us to come up with this theme for this year. Last year we had, Wim Storken as part of the discussion panel, who's one of the suppliers of the Food Lab as well as Reinier. And we had Nikki Sigurdsson, who's participant from last year, and Mark Frank, who's food fore specialist. So that all sort of made us think, yeah, what shall we do this year? So reclaiming taste. And in the next 3 days, we'll show this theme through different angles, through different projects, and yeah, all sorts of fun happenings. I'll give the word to Juliana.
Thank you, Marente, and thank you everybody for being here for the opening of the Food Art Film Festival. Just about reclaiming taste, that's something I would like to add. It's a small, maybe philosophical reflection about why taste and why, in my opinion, it's interesting to think taste as an entry point to our interconnected world. So if we think about eating and digesting as a way of letting something of the outer world to enter into our inner world, we can understand, or we can imagine the parallels between eating, digesting, tasting, and knowing. So connected to this, we have invited 3 panelists today, and in the upcoming days, we'll have many different activities that will invite the public to reflect on this concept, on how we can imagine taste as a sensorial platform to gain a better grasp of our interconnected stories and histories as well. So today we have here 3 different panelists who will specifically reflect on the interconnections between soil, landscapes, and taste from their own perspective, from their own research and practices. The panel will be structured in 2 different moments. The first one will indeed, the panelists will offer their entry points into the topic, and in the second one, it will be more speculative and imaginative, and we will try to think together about what does it mean to reclaim taste, and how taste can play a role in imagining moments, space, and time of communality where we can share stories, and also how they can make historical traumas also become more tangible and perhaps open up possibilities of healing. So without no further ado, because the program is quite intense, I will introduce the guest of today. I will start with Barbara, online. So Barbara Glowczeski is a professorial high distinction tenure researcher at the French National Scientific Research Center, CNRS, member of the Laboratory of Social Anthropology, Collège de France. She teaches at EHESS, and she's an anthropologist working in Australia since 1979 with Australian indigenous communities, strategies of recognition, and social and environmental justice against ecocide. Glowczeski is author of 12 books, last Indigenizing Anthropology with Guattari and Deleuze, EUP publication, 2020, Réveiller les esprits de la terre, Terroir, 2021, and some of 200 articles and several multimedia productions. She's involved in activist endeavors to protect and reclaim lands and soil in France and French overseas territories, Guyana and Polynesia. Together with her, we have Suzi Pijnenburg, who is a gastronomist, and in her study she has combined food science and technology, think physics, chemistry, microbiology, with food sociology, using food as a lens to understand culture. Through industry, academia, and projects in the arts and science of deliciousness, she has tried to gain a holistic understanding of our food system. She completed her MSc in gastronomy at the Wageningen University with 1.5-year research project on the topic of taste. Rather than focusing on the physiology of taste or on specific flavors, she tries to understand how taste is socially constructed. Finally, Reinier Hoon farms in Cannes, in Belgium, just outside of Maastricht. He grows a great diversity of mainly seed-resistant varieties of vegetables and herbs in Cannes and Maastricht. Flavor is central to both the choice of varieties and his working method, because, as he puts it, taste is the best compass on our journey to health, soil, plants, people, and environment. So please give a welcome with a warm applause to our guest. So I suggest we start with Reinier, perhaps, and then Barbara, and then we close with Suzi. Yeah, Reinier, if you can share with us like your insight about the connection between soil and taste and how there's like this reciprocal interconnection between the two. So what's your, from your own perspective?
And, thanks first and foremost for giving so much attention over the course of this festival to this topic by specifying by making this festival, which has revolved around the role of food in our communities, to make that revolve specifically around taste, around flavor, and the power that that has to transform the way in which we relate to food, to each other, to our bodies, and our landscapes, and each other. Because I think for me, I mean personally, flavor has, or taste has always played a central role in my life through farming at a very young age, but it's only over the course of the last couple of years when I started doing this professionally that I started to understand more and more how taste can play such or should play a central role in healing our food systems. And I think that I maybe to start by I think it's interesting to analyze a bit how we in general tend to look at flavor and taste at the moment, culturally speaking, before going into the power it can have to make our relationships and the way in which we feed ourselves healthier. Because I think that currently when we think of eating well, so eating tasty food, we see that as something that is mainly there to bring us pleasure. So to have, to experience, to have a pleasurable experience through eating things that we enjoy. And then that relationship is actually often one in which we then consequently tend to feel guilt for that pleasure that we experience. And it's maybe interesting to figure out a bit how that relationship came about. Because it is the case that often when we eat things that we enjoy, well, to put it bluntly, we feel miserable after. Maybe not immediately, maybe the next day, which is, something that is that creates a relationship, so a relationship of distrust with our capacity to taste. So it's interesting then to look at what is it then that we eat and enjoy a lot, and and that makes our body protest basically. And there you see that our tendency over the last 50 years to eat more and more industrially processed foods that sort of tap into the flavors that we intuitively enjoy. However, processing those food like the products that look like food, depleting them of the nutrients that are, let's say, intuitively connected to those basic flavors. They make us, they don't give our bodies the gratification or the nutrients that that those basic flavors used to give. To give this very simple example is if you eat if you eat sweets or Haribo cherries, you might have the flavor of an artificial flavor of cherries combined with sugar, which is also present in red fruits, which trigger intuitively many of the positive sort of responses that our bodies give us, the cues they give us when we would eat actual cherries, which evokes this sense of pleasure. However, by having them depleted those foodstuffs of all of the many beneficial elements that those cherries would have contained, they make us feel horrible the next day instead of super healthy and good and powerful. Yeah, because all of the vitamins, the minerals, and the phytochemicals that we would find in those cherries are not present. And I think that, I mean, as a response, many people, by eating many things, many products that are, yeah, not necessary or not very healthy, they feel a tendency or sort of an urge to figure out what it would mean to eat healthier. And to do so, yeah, we often look for sort of third parties. We look for specialists on the matter. We look for yeah, people who can advise us in healthy diets. We look for certification organizations that give us cues on how our products have been grown. So whether they are, whether they have been treated or fed with chemical and or with chemical fertilizers or substances to protect crops against diseases, or we look maybe at certain other sort of health claims that we find on packaging. And I think that sort of that lineage, that connection is a way in which we gradually yeah, lose our connection to flavor. And sort of intuitively, I've always enjoyed good food, but as I started out, when I started farming professionally now, yeah, a little over 3 years ago, I'm now in my 4th season of full-time growing vegetables. I mean, I wanted to do that at the outset, of course, sustainably, organically, and you start out with certain sort of yeah, beginning points of trying to figure out what it then means to grow well and be a farmer that contributes to the health of the ecosystem that you are a part of. So to contribute to the health of the people who consume your products in the first place, to contribute to the health of the place that allows you to grow, and the wider environment. And for me, along that process, I think I more and more realized that if flavor or taste is the focus of our practices in the field, then even though it is not always that straightforward of what it means to farm well, it is the compass that always guides you into the direction of contributing maximally to the health of all life that's affected by your practices. So that is the health of your soil, the health of the plants that you grow, the health of the animals or the people that eat those crops, and the communities that, yeah, the sort of connection between communities and the land more generally that allows us to farm.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it would be interesting to come back later on this connection between health of soil, health of bodies. But perhaps I'll just pass the word to Barbara, since we're talking about land and communities. And I'm sure she has insights for us coming from her research, both in Europe and in Australia. Barbara, thank you.
Thank you very much to both Mariente and Juliana, and also to Reinier and Suzi for being in this panel. I have been working in Australia since 1979, and especially 43 years ago, I started in Central Australia, where people have been forced to sedentary life after semi-nomadic life right up to the 50s, 1950s. So the oldest generation grew up on hunting and gathering and passed on the taste for this kind of food to their younger generations. And as soon as people could, which was possible with the reclaim of land that happened in the 70s, go back in the bush outside of the reserve, it was always what they wanted to eat. That is game, kangaroo, emu, and all sorts of reptiles like goannas, lizards, snake, and all sorts of little marsupials like possum, and also a lot of other vegetable bush food. But of course, with the colonial process, what happened is that there was a massive import of different kind of food, which meant to bring cattle. And that cattle, even in the desert, was spread across huge parts of the bush and destroyed the soil because the cattle had very heavy, you know, end of legs. I forgot the word in English. You know, can somebody help me? No? Hoof?
Hooves.
Hooves, yes. Okay, so the hooves have really destroyed the surface of the soil, which in the Australian bush is the part which is the most fertile. And because of that, it became much more difficult, not only for vegetables, I mean, native vegetables to continue to grow, but also for animals to find their food. And all this was a big problem, and there started to be extinction of many species. Like there used to be in the Central Australia, even in the desert parts, more than 400 different species of marsupial game. So you can imagine the catastrophe, the extinction that the people went through in those regions of Australia. Now, the other problem has been that the massive arrival of cattle meat, because many Aboriginal people were employed without being paid on farms to look after the cattle. They got a taste for beef food, and in the 70s, and it's still true today, they can eat meat if they can afford it, morning, lunch, and evening. Now even the meals are not so regular, but there is a lot of meat which is eaten. And the other thing that was brought by colonization, by the missions, and by the whole capitalistic system, which was imposed on the consumption of indigenous people in Australia, but also elsewhere, is sugar. I mean, Aboriginal people had access to sugar through honey, native honey, which you would find in trees, native bees, but also in the soil through what's called the honey ants that you can dig in a special places where there is a big concentration of honey ants. And also there is a whole series of fruit, bush fruit, which is very sweet, but this is what they were eating. And the massive input of sugar that we all suffer from all across the planet has completely changed their diet and their health. And today, like in many indigenous communities across the world, a lot of people suffer of diabetes and of obesity because of this sugar intake. So there is another thing which is interesting, is that the colonization has brought other species also, like for instance, rabbits. Now rabbits, for many reasons, were not eaten by Australian settlers, but they became wild, they multiplied, and they became food for Aboriginal people who had to run away from being chased by the settlers and chased away from their waterholes, and also with massacres and so on. So they acquired a taste for rabbit. Now we eat rabbit in France, but Australians today still consider that eating rabbits, it's something that is, you know, for the poor, for Aboriginal people. Now rabbits brought another problem, I mean, which is a sickness, and they had to be eradicated. So anyway, that's an example for meat. The other example is for any vegetables. Now, all these, you know, when you go to Australia, you're not allowed to bring any seeds or anything that is made of vegetable. Now, in Australia, there is a lot of so-called invasive plants. But again, there is a whole movement, both of Aboriginal people in alliance with some permaculturists who are not necessarily indigenous, who work. You know, Australia is one of the birthplace for permaculture. And so they think that in so-called invasive plants should be better called nomadic plants, and they can be they can help actually even to restore some of the native plants. And so that's something for discussion. Now, the last thing I would like to say, I don't know about time now, you tell me, is that this nomadic circuit of plants had also effect back in Europe on the colonial countries, because before Australia became 250 years ago British colony, there has been a big expedition during Napoleon time to Australia, and they brought hundreds and hundreds of specimens that Napoleon's wife, Josephine, grew in a garden near Paris. And these are things like, I don't know in English, how you say, the immortel, the immortel, anyway, very different species, which now have become very, very common in Europe, which have also healthy, not just tasty, but also can help and heal. Now, in Australia, on the other hand, the food that Aboriginal people tasted, like emus, kangaroos, and so on, was rejected by the missionary discourse, because in the Bible, in the Levitic, you have things that say that it is a sin to eat animals who have only two legs, or to eat animals who are not in the water but have squales, that is all the reptiles. So there was and also animals who have feathers and don't fly, which is the case of emus, like ostriches in South Africa. So many believers, Christians, did not want to eat this native food. But nowadays, that's a little revenge, I suppose, many restaurants, tourist restaurants, actually propose that food, and it's very popular for tourists, so people who have the money to pay for it, because they're very expensive restaurants. And on the other hand, many indigenous people have developed little companies to value their bush food and to pass agreements with some big shops in cities, so to transform some of the seeds, like the gabbinge seed, which is very rich in vitamin C and can be used under different forms, and also to provide some restaurants with different spices and seeds and other things.
Thank you, Barbara. Well, I think like from this last connection between like global food webs as well as the cultural taboos connected to food, I will pass the word to Suzi. And it would be really interesting, Suzi, if you can talk us through differences between taste, flavor, what is, if this embodied perception of the world is culturally constructed, socially constructed, just your insights into this topic.
Yeah, gladly. So something that I find very interesting about smaak, but also taste, the English word, is it describes two things. It describes both a cultural preference and the flavor itself. However, according to the theories of some sociologists like Meredith Abarca, the cultural preferences of a social group are both created by individuals in that social group, and they are then again transmitted to the people in that social group. So everybody here, everyone has an individual sense memory of foods that they like and that they consider good. But when you put all of those people into a space, imagine if we had to live in this room for 1 year and all we could eat was the vegetables that Reinier can grow here. Eventually, we would get ideas about which vegetables are good and how to best prepare the vegetables. And some of those ideas would be shared. And this is what Abarca describes. And the edges of that you can also see in food taboos, which Barbara was talking about. So food taboos, one of the oldest ones known in Western culture is, of course, the ones from the Bible, where foods that are not classifiable easily as one clear thing are taboo. So in the Bible, in I think it was Leviathan, as you were saying, if you have an animal that swims or that has scales but it doesn't swim, it's really weird. It's not a fish, it's not a land animal. What is that thing? So it's strange. And if it's strange, it's scary. And in that way, those foods became profane. It became something where if you eat it, it pollutes your body and it's very bad, so you should not be eating it. But as you can see from the difference in taste between the Western settlers in Australia and the Aboriginals eating there, these food taboos are not universal. So they are really socially constructed. And what you think is good food is very, very much a product of both your individual preferences and perceptions and food experience and your own individual sense memory, which can be very much triggered by flavor, like in this very famous example of Marcel Proust eating a madeleine in the book Memory of Forgotten Time, something like this. It's a scene where the author visits his aunt's house, eats a madeleine dipped in tea, and immediately is thrown back into a very strong sense memory of when he was a child. And these kinds of sense memories we all have, generally speaking, unless you have anosmia, in which case, boy, food must be very boring for you. But these kinds of sense memories are one of the ways that we, as people, socially and culturally construct what is good food and what is not good food. And another really interesting aspect of that is that historically speaking, of course, the place where you're from and the microclimate, the soil, the species native there, and the species present there have a huge impact on what is considered food and what you can even try to taste. Like before the Columbian exchange, nobody in Europe had ever seen a tomato. So when tomatoes and potatoes arrived, they too were seen as taboo and really terrifying. But once they arrived and had actually, after another significant amount of time, become part of our normal diet, people accepted them. But again, if you are living in a region where, because the soil is wrong or the microclimate is wrong, certain foods don't grow, then up to globalization, you actually probably wouldn't have that much experience with different foods. And even today, we can see very strong cultural preferences depending on which foods grew very well in a region once upon a time. For example, in the Netherlands and in Belgium, jenever became a drink. It's a thing. It later became gin. But that's also because we're good at growing barley and those kinds of grains here. Whereas in Italy and France, you don't have as much jenever, traditionally speaking, as a really traditional beverage, but you do have grappa. Now, it's not that strange that grappa would grow in the south where you can grow grapes and not in the north where you can grow grains. So especially in drinks, in my thesis research, I found that there really are like some traces of different beverages which are popular even nowadays and which are associated with specific places even nowadays that have a lot to do with simply what used to grow there. And then the last part, of course, is with terroir, that also the microbiome of the, especially for fermented foods, the microbiome of a specific region, which is of course impacted by soil composition, microclimate, and available nutrients, that has a really big impact on the flavor as well. So if you are fermenting a beer with a wild yeast from some tree resin in Chile somewhere, it will taste different from if you're fermenting it with a wild yeast taken from these flowers here. And that's also one of the very interesting kind of ways that you can see that the microbial terroir can have a direct impact on the flavor itself. And this is probably also something that links very much to your work and your vegetables, that you can really taste the land where it came from. And you can taste the land both culturally and historically and just really physiologically. It makes an impact. So that's something that's so fascinating about flavor. It's both very physical and very socially constructed.
Reinier, do you want to add something from your experience?
No, I think that many very interesting points are being brought up, especially in this sort of, well, I can very much relate to what Suzi now brings up about sort of a feedback loop between what we eat, our experiences, how we share them, and then the sort of shared cultural or gastronomic practices that we develop around them. And I think that over the course of centuries, we have sort of collectively learned different things in different regions about how to feed ourselves well. So that means different farming practices, ranging from how to keep your soil fertile without chemical fertilizer, because they didn't exist, to what varieties are locally adapted, so grow well in a specific region and taste well, to how to cook well with everything that's present in a specific region to create dishes that we enjoy, trusting that if we eat the things that we find flavorful, we're feeding ourselves well, and then sharing that culturally. So really using all of the functions of our ecosystem and understanding ourselves as part of that ecosystem to be healthy without seeing health as something that we're focused at and that we're occupied with all the time, as that being the focus of why we eat, basically. And I think that link, the way I experience it, is something that has been, over the course of the last 50 years, been deeply broken. There is a lot of knowledge on all of those different elements that has already been lost. I mean, if you look at this area specifically, for example, and you focus on farming practices and like local vegetable varieties, or at least sort of subtypes of, for example, root celery or leeks, there were, even if you go back just after the Second World War on sort of the south side of Maastricht, still between 50 and 60 small-scale vegetable farmers who would all keep their own seeds of the best leek that they have and continue to improve the varieties that they work with. It's all gone. I know maybe a bit less about the sort of gastronomic heritage of this area or different regions of the Netherlands, but our traditions of working with these the ingredients that we as local farmers produce have also much been lost. And I think the work now really is to realize that and to figure out ways in which we can both rediscover those histories, but also actively pick up the work that we've laid down for a while. And that means that we as farmers don't just go back to what we often call heirloom and the old varieties, not just romanticism, not just looking back, but taking of our past, sort of in our gastronomic tradition and farming tradition, those things that are relevant to the challenges we're facing today, and continue the work, basically. Continue to learn on all of those aspects, continue to improve the varieties we work with, continue to learn together with chefs on how to use and combine those ingredients. I think that's central to taking that tradition back up and culturally creating a sense of taste that actually heals us and our landscapes. Yeah.
Thank you. I think there are like many interesting aspects the three of you raised. I'm particularly, I would like to know more, or just to think more about these feedback loops that connect all of us and the food webs globally, but also in our micro localities. But I think perhaps we should pass to the next speculative moment of the panel. Mariente, do you want to take it over? Okay. Before I leave these questions to the Q&A afterwards, and I'm sure perhaps some in the audience might also have questions connected to some insights you offered us. So the second moment is how to reclaim taste. And how can taste become actually like an empowering tool, perhaps, to think our realities otherwise, to learn to be together, not only between humans, but between the other than humans and the more than human landscapes that are surrounding us and of which we are part of. And also how we can, through taste, perhaps, imagine regenerative modes of relating to land, reclaiming land, relating to soil, and also think another way of relating to soils, thinking about this idea of the depletion of soil health and body health and how we're all interconnected. And it's also very interesting to think about the microbiota, the microbiome, which is of the soil as much as of our body. And they are both impacted by in industrial farming and unsustainable farming techniques. And there is so much more. So perhaps I will just follow the same order. I will give the word to Reinier, and then to Barbara, and then to Suzi.
Yeah, I think, I mean, maybe already went a bit into that, or a way forward in responding to the words of the others. But I mean, we were here a year ago, and we spoke a little bit about what then, to me, like, I mean, this subject of realizing that in agricultural crops we have lost a lot over the course of the past 50 years in terms of micronutrients, so vitamins, minerals, and phytochemicals, next to calories, so actually the things that feed us. In the varieties we grow and how we grow them, we have lost a lot. And actually that's something that, like, specifically on understanding better how cultivars, vegetable varieties differ in that respect. That's something we're only learning now. There is more and more research being done trying to understand that relation between our practices and nutrient density in our crops. And it's something that, for me, is at the center of the work I do, of understanding that relationship and trying to grow nutrient-dense crops beyond organic.
Can you perhaps just tell us more about how you do this process? Because it might not be so obvious for some of us.
Well, there maybe just to go back 1 second, so because there what we see in that research is that flavor and nutrient density are, that flavor is the best proxy or indicator of nutrient density, which makes sense, right? If something contains a lot of flavonoids or and that Suzi knows better than I do, but
color, of course,
and
you have anthocyanins and
in grapes and
something very orange has more beta carotenes.
Exactly, it actually feeds us, right? So that's why it makes sense to go back to focus on flavor, and if the aim is to feed yourself well, basically, or the people that eat your products. Now, how do you do that? Not that straightforward. It's not like growing organically. Growing organic is in a way simple because you have a list of things you're not allowed to do. You check the boxes and you comply. But that's not, so that's sort of a closed system. Growing well is an open system. It's a system of many nuanced questions, like what varieties are in my cover crop mix, for example, right? I grow what we call a cash crop, for example, carrots, and then if you have space in the growing season after, you plant a cover crop, so plants that take up nutrients, feed organic material back into the soil, feed the soil food web, so all of the bacteria, fungi, and insects that live in your soil, to basically vitalize or give a boost to all of the health and life in your soil, which will then the year after help to do many things, but feed the crop you're growing again in a way that's more complete than if you would just give it, for example, a chemical fertilizer or something that's very simplistic in what in the way in which it feeds your plants. Now, a second is selection of varieties, which is very important because there are very big differences in flavor profiles between different cultivars of carrots, for example, or of broccoli. Figuring that out is a very long way. I'm not a research farm, so every year we try different varieties, and we decide to get with chefs which ones we find most interesting, and those we plant again. So that's just, and there are more elements to the way in which you plant and seed, or whether you seed or plant, that have an effect on the health of your plant. Now, I think to summarize that, for me, the way in which you should do that is to focus on growing complexity, or on fostering complexity around and in the crops that you grow. So complexity in your soil in terms of its biology, complexity in the genetics of a population of plants you're growing, complexity in terms of how many different crops you grow, that all adds to the resilience, flavor, and complexity of what we eat in the end, and so also the complexity of how we feed us, basically. I think that's yeah, that's how you do that, and that's very much a process. It's not something that is that straightforward.
Yeah, I would like, perhaps later to talk more about this idea of eating well and what is good, right? When our taste has been maybe manipulated or maybe just influenced by so many stories and histories. And I'll pass the word to Barbara. Think about this, like how taste has been manipulated, and you already mentioned also the impact that sugar, but also I imagine fat, might have had on communities that had actually a healthier diet or a different diet. And we spoke together before about also carbs, so diets that are full of carbs, mainly in the West, versus diets that are actually lighter and have less of this substance. But I'm also perhaps curious to hear from you, Barbara, your insight about certain perhaps approaches to taste that you might have encountered in the indigenous communities you spend time with. And perhaps in our previous conversation, you mentioned the example of water, which I found particularly inspiring. So pick up on any of these.
Okay, well, complexity, diversity, interconnections between plants and between plants and other things, like not just the way humans do things for plants, but also animals and wind and water and fire. Now, there is a lesson to draw from indigenous people that is not just looking at the past for nostalgia, but at looking for solutions today and for the future. Because there was a long-term misunderstanding about the effect of fire on soil. It depends how it is used and where it is used and for what. Now, the recent big bushfires in Australia have shown that regions where Aboriginal people were allowed to restart fire management by doing small fires during periods of the year where it's not dry, is a way to clean the land, which is necessary, and to look after the land for different reasons. There are some plants that need a little bit of fire to open their seeds. And also there are plants that need this cleanup, as Aboriginal people say when they care for the country, to prevent some other plants to stop them from growing, right? So this way that humans, through certain cultural means, have looked after the country is not a passive way of hunting and gathering, just like if you were in the Garden of Eden and everything is given. It means to do a lot of things, which today brings a debate about what it actually was, the hunting and gathering life, both in Australia and for our ancestors in Europe and elsewhere, because the way Aboriginal people who are there since at least 65,000 years, and so a lot of geological changes, both with volcanoes that stopped and big floods and so on, in fact, have transformed the soil and the land for a better way of living in the way they were living. And the way the colonization has destroyed that soil now has to be healed. And one of the way of healing it, and this is why I was talking about all those little indigenous enterprises that develop, is to revalue with new means and new technologies traditional knowledges of that very strong interconnection between soil, plants, animals, wind, water, and fire. And of course, as you know, there is a drought threatening Australia and many other countries in the world. There is all the transformation because of the climate, which is accelerated by economical choices like extractivism through mining, and so which is destroying a lot of places in Australia. Not just the soil, but affecting the waters, which are interconnected at the level of the whole continent. So we really have to find new ways to look after the country. And one interesting thing in that debate about the non-appropriate opposition between hunting and gathering and agriculture today is precisely all the different ways that Reinier was advocating of finding of helping things to grow in this diversity, and also by a type of gestures that are not as violent as the technological equipment that continues to destroy our land when it's only a monoculture, right? And that needs much more water than places that generate water, like forests generates its own water. So just one example. I gave the example of the gabbinge. Gabbinge grows apparently widely, right? And it's a bit like grapes. That is that the gabbinge only grows for 1 month. But during that 1 month, it's like huge fields in the bush. And people need to go there collectively to be able to pick up that gabbinge fruit before it's rotten. And a whole family can gather right up 9 tons, right? 9 tons is not farming, in the sense that they did nothing except a few bushfires to clean the land during the year to get that gabbinge there. But it needs to be picked up every year so it continues to grow. And it's the same in the desert with the so-called bush tomato. It's only also for 1 month in April that it grows. But when it grows, you have to go and pick it up, and you have to open the fruits which have a seed inside, which is very poisonous, but the seed falls on the ground, and you use the rest of the fruit, you put on a stick to dry, like figs and or dates. And because the seeds fall, there is new bushes with tomatoes the year after. So when indigenous people were not allowed to go back on their land and to practice these things, well, it has actually stopped growing, but it can regrow.
Yeah, very, very inspiring. Yeah, I think there's like this recurrent theme of rediscovering and reviving ancient knowledges, or knowledges that have been, yeah, perhaps suppressed. Suzi.
So I'm actually very curious myself. Barbara, I know that in each case, since a while, there's also more and more interest in bush foods and in traditional foods coming from restaurants and from kind of the culinary movement that we see ongoing now, which is trying to really revalue local ingredients and different ways of using and preserving local ingredients. So you see the whole new Nordic cuisine movement, which started already quite a while ago, but it's still going very strong with an emphasis on local ingredients and fermentation. And do you think that that is also helping to revalue and reestablish these traditions in Australia? And for you, I would have also the same question, kind of. I would guess, as a gastronomist, that the culinary movement of revaluing local foods, revaluing also eating more vegetable-based and doing more fermentation and more preservation of different ingredients and trying to get flavor in those ways, instead of, say, deciding the Canadian lobster is the absolute best lobster in the world and we should, as a fancy restaurant, fly the very fancy lobster in planes every day to serve, instead using a local ingredient. I would guess that it would have also a localized, but both culturally and kind of promoting these kinds of initiatives push to revalue these kinds of foods. And do you think that you've also seen this actually happen on the ground? Because of course it's still only a small proportion of people who then have access to that kind of food. But hopefully it can serve as a greater culinary movement in popular culture as well, to create this kind of feedback loop of reclaiming these flavors and reclaiming the land and reconnecting to the land. And I do think that there's some hope for that. But what do you think? Because you're working and researching with Aboriginal communities. You're actively growing vegetables in a different way. do you think that there is kind of an increasing feedback loop of interest and initiatives in that?
Yeah, for me, I think it's essential, and there is many initiatives, but they have to struggle against two things. One is the addiction that people have to the food that we were criticizing before. That is the sugar, the fat, and just calories. I mean, it's an addiction, and it's very difficult to get out of it. And it's affected indigenous people just as it affects many people in our cities too, or in countries, whatever. Now, the second thing is the economic conception that because we need a lot of food, because there is a lot of people in the world, it always has to be produced at a big scale. And the idea that small scale is from the past, or it's just for family. Now, it's showing nowadays, take in India, for instance, there is extraordinary examples of that, which in one special region of India, a program now is reaching 1 million of peasants who have, thanks to their Shire initiative, stopped using pesticide. And in fact, in 1 year, they're eating much better, I mean, more. There is less hunger and less pressure, because peasants were suiciding for that pressure than before. And so the movement is actually developing so that in a contagious way, so that all their neighbors continue to go back to some traditional ways of growing crop at a smaller community scale, and not monoculture, but pluriculture. Now, the same could be applied everywhere in the world, but that means to change our values and to accept the idea that we are all responsible in a way towards the place where we live and share with other people. And this is the scale, the regional scale. And it's something that can be pushed for, at least at the European level, because both France and your country belong to it, and Belgium and so on, because valuing this regional food autonomy of collectives is essential to make everybody feel better, and the land and the people and all.
No, I think those are very, very interesting points, because I really see that too here in the area. So I see that more and more restaurants really recognize the social and environmental responsibility that they have, and also the impact that they can have by making different choices in the ingredients they use. And they're, in that sense, often also, of course, prone to sort of communicate that and to use that in their in their advertisement. So there are also, in that sense, there's still many challenges related to sort of the development of a cuisine based on locally grown, and flavorful, healthy products, but you do see a trend towards it. Now, I think that, I mean, it's one of the things that allows me to do the work that I do, and I think that maybe 10 or 15 years ago, that wouldn't have been possible. It wouldn't have been possible for a restaurant to say, listen, Reinier, here is, well, we make a contract and you grow us 1/4 of a hectare of vegetables and you bring us every day what grows on it. But there are restaurants now who really want to work with what there is available. And there you also see that's one of the challenges, is that for many chefs still have the habit, or they are used to the fact that they can order, like that they are the center of the creative process basically, and not what's happening on the farm. So they come up with a dish and expect that is available, right? Even, and still, if it's in season, it might not be available on one of the farms around town. So they have to learn to really work ahead of time together with the farmer, with the things that will become available in 2 or 3 weeks' time, basically. And that is for many chefs a challenge, but at the same time I'm also seeing that with one of the restaurants with whom I've been working now super closely for since the beginning, or since I started doing this for work, is that this is the first season that I see that the garden is in the DNA of the kitchen, and that they know intuitively the season we're in, and that they know that fall is now slowly arriving, and there's spinach coming, there are turnips back, and they are already preparing dishes with that instead of always being too late. After, when a new crop is available, that we then only start thinking about dishes we can work with. So I think that there also we have to realize that those processes of learning take time, and that they're often frustrating, but we need to continue to remind ourselves of sort of what that compass is and where we, where we want to head together, and understand above all that it's a process that we go through, or that's a change that we can realize collectively within a region. That it's all about collaborations, because this is about so much more than just eating more nutrient-dense vegetables that make our crops that make us healthier. It's about understanding that food is not just a thing, but it's about, above all, a relationship to our own bodies, to the people who produce, to our landscapes, to future generations, to our rivers. And I think that that's the thing that we do not always focus on when we see something, when we see a plate of food, basically, that all of the relationships that are behind it. And it's about feeding those and trusting that if we treat them well, that those sources will also feed us.
I would like just to add a very short thing in that process, is that distribution is very important too. And during the lockdown, many things changed. And after the lockdown in France, many producers who were doing flowers, and flowers are pretty to look at, and tasteful also to eat and put in the salad and other things. And the flowers that are cut in France, like most of them had to be sent to Netherlands to be sold back in flower shops in France. Because Netherlands has this monopoly of redispatching across Europe and elsewhere in the world flowers that come from different countries in Europe. And it's interesting because after the lockdown, many small places that were growing flowers stopped doing that and organized their own distribution. And many flower shops in France do not go through the Netherlands monopoly, but prefer now to buy from those who grow flowers in France. So this has an effect also on what you find on your table, and how you can exist by producing flowers or other things, and also how all this can be complementary. It doesn't mean to close your national frontiers. It means to organize different kinds of transnational networks, but not monopoles.
Yeah, this links very much to something that I'm always wary with, Barbara, because on the one hand, producing more regionally and eating more regionally is very important. On the other hand, we also have many people living, for example, in Europe now, that are in a way a product of globalization. If I look at my family, if we have to sum it all up, something like Indonesian, Chinese, Dutch with Antillean and Jewish Czech influences, which means that if I want to eat my comfort food, but I only have Dutch ingredients, I get very miserable. I actually tried this at one point during COVID to eat pretty much only vegetables and some meat from local producers. And then the staples like pasta and stuff, or rice you get from the supermarket, but my vegetables and food were coming from local producers. And And it was lovely for the first couple of months, but after 6 months of cabbage in winter, I really, really wanted some spring greens. So I was extremely excited when they arrived. But also then, I was using condiments from very different places in the world. Because, yeah, I want my sambal and my ketchup mayonnaise, otherwise I can't make my comfort food. So on the one hand, it's very important to produce regionally. On the other hand, it is also important to produce what is culturally appropriate for people. And one of the most inspiring examples of that I saw recently was actually oddly enough, in the Netherlands we have a province called Flevoland, which we made. We decided we didn't have enough land, so we took a swamp, drained it, and built a city there, which is called Almere, and it was always seen as this like fast food city and absolutely terrible, with a lot of fast food, a lot of obesities and health issues, and all of this kinds of stuff. And now there's a lot of research being done into how to relocalize their food system, so how to create city-based and like city metropole-based tiny metropole. It's still the Netherlands, we're very small. City-based food systems for the future, but in a way that is also culturally appropriate. So you can see that they said, well, we have a lot of people from Suriname descent here, and they really like a sopropot bitter melon, which is kind of the classic example they keep using themselves as well. And so they started doing projects around how do we grow bitter melon around here, and how do we make foods with it? Oh, actually, it's kind of like a cucumber, but it looks different and tastes way more bitter. How do we grow that around here? And there was also a very cool initiative from someone who had a greenhouse. And instead of doing mass production for the commodity market in the greenhouse, he actually decided to start renting plots in it for the community gardens. And there's a huge amount of Suriname people now doing moestuintjes, doing like small family plots in this greenhouse, which is incredible because in the Netherlands, if you see people who have moestuintjes, very often it's, well, white people with a lot of money and time on their hands. It's not necessarily immigrant communities. And now the Suriname community immigrated a really long time ago, but still it's super cool to see cultures mixing and to see the development of localized and culturally appropriate food systems. And this also matches very well with this not closing your borders, but creating transnational networks, like, you farming in Belgium and being here. On a very tiny scale again.
Yeah. Let's open it to the public, online and offline.
I have a question to the three of you, Suzi, Reinier, and Barbara. One aspect I haven't heard you talk about, that's taste and location. I'll tell you about a personal experience, but I guess some others had this experience as well. I was in Portugal some years ago and had a lovely evening with Vinho Verde, the white wine and these nice bottles. And it tasted wonderful. I took a few bottles home and they tasted very, very common. There was nothing special about it. Have you anything to say about that?
So my master's thesis was about what makes a drink good. And it was actually about spirits and cocktails. And I asked spirit and cocktail professionals, so bartenders, distillers, liquor store owners. But what really came out of it most of all was, one, a drink itself isn't good. If you have a bottle of Vinho Verde floating in space, it's not good or bad. It's just indifferent. It's neutral. It just exists. So whether something is good and bad only comes to life when you are experiencing it. So goodness or badness, according to my research participants, is an experiential property of a drink. So the experience that you're having is incredibly important in this. There's also a researcher called Heldke, I think Lisa Heldke, who's done really fascinating work on authenticity and poses that as well as an experiential property of a dish. So maybe also the wine tasted more authentic in Portugal because of the experience around it. Because she argues it's not about the bottle of wine, but it's about the bottle of wine in and with its experience. So the whole setting and the way you're feeling and every experience around it and whether you talk to the producer also has a really strong impact on how you are experiencing this wine And they also described how whether a drink is good is also determined in two ways. So one is tasting. That is a learned set of things you do, of methods you make. That's very analytical, and you try to kind of objectively decide whether a drink is good. Not whether you like it, but whether your customers would like it, for example. So that's the whole thing where you swirl and sniff and sip the wine, and then you evaluate which flavors it has, whether they are balanced, whether they're complex, whether it's produced in the proper way, etc., etc. But then the other part of it is enjoying. And enjoying is not at all about analytically analyzing something. It's just about sitting there and feeling the sun on your face and going, oh, this is great. And one of the points they made was that you can have the world's greatest glühwein, the best glühwein ever made in the world, and you're still not going to enjoy it in a heat wave. So probably the wine you had was very enjoyable in the setting, but in terms of tasting for you fell flat. So that is the best answer I can give you. Whether something is a good drink and whether you will enjoy it is complex, it's experiential, and it's not only the flavor itself, but it's also everything around it. So that's my viewpoint. How about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that so there you see that we can maybe that wine just wasn't good, but you got sort of swayed by the circumstances, in the sense that no.
Also, yes.
Yeah.
Like for example, one of the massive challenges in some food product developments is how do you make decent tasting airplane food? I've talked to some people from a company that makes airplane food, and it is one of the most technically challenging thing to make airplane food that is not nasty, because depending on the altitude and for example, the dryness of the air, the way you experience flavors will actually drastically change. So imagine you were on a mountain in Portugal, different altitude, probably it's going to taste a little bit different. Maybe the air humidity was different, can also have an impact, and the food you eat with something also has a large impact. But yes, the environment also has physical chemical impacts on how you experience a flavor.
Yeah. May I say something?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know nothing, as you know, for wine, but I'm thinking about water, and water can have different tastes, of course, and there is also a very old tradition everywhere of fountains, I mean springs, which have healing properties. And there is a lot of studies that are done about the properties of water, and there are very different kinds of water. And some of those waters have been used for a very long time to put on your skin or against different disease, skin disease or others, and also to drink. But it is known now, and I have no explanation, but I'm sure there are specialists who could answer on that, that when you put that water, even take the now holy water of the Lourdes in Christian places, into a bottle or a plastic bottle or a glass bottle and so on, it can lose its properties. So it's very important not to put it in just anything. And it's also the case for the issue of the food in the plane. I mean, what you drink in and eat in. But then when you store it, where do you store it? And there are places which maintain the properties of what you store in a glass bottle. And there are places which are not good and will change the water. Now, we don't have very rational explanations for that, but there are very rational analysis of water that shows that it changes. Now, it's interesting because of the healing properties of some waters, that means also that it's a question of care. And the care of the water is the care of the way we live with that water, and also the place where we put it, right? So everything's connected.
Great. As a third example, maybe I'll tell you a little anecdote first that some friends of mine from the Reinier told me. That's basically a Belgian brewery of beer. They changed location after being in a place for hundreds of years. They changed location because they grew beer or something. And the beer didn't taste the same. What they came up with in the end was that basically they needed to take a little bit of the old environment, like they took a few bricks or whatever, took it to the new environment, and things started to happen again for that beer. In a similar way, basically, I make sourdough. I make a lot of fermented stuff. If I do it in Scotland and I bring that starter home with me, even bring the same flours with me, then basically the bread will taste completely different here as the very same product in Scotland. So the wild yeast in the environment, like I think Scotland is where I work, is very wild, and here maybe a little bit less so. That has a large influence. So maybe when you open up your bottle of wine, it needs to breathe for a bit, like it interacts with the environment. Maybe that plays a role.
Thank you so much. I mean, so much has been said, and I wanted to say something before, and then it changed because you've said so much again. So let me see if I can get it right. Because of the complexity, right, of the issue. So first you started with taste and the link with taste and nutrients, right? I was very interested in that. Then taste is also a social construct, right? So how do we feed ourselves well when we all think differently? So many of these things take place in the social realm as well, as much as they take place in the land itself and where you are working with your hands in the soil. So I was thinking of that. So how does one bring, and then there is the distribution system, which I also agree with. So how does one bring this kind of complexity in a world that is most of all going towards a simplicity or a standardization of food, maybe because of the distributive elements and the scaling and capacity elements of what food production is. But if there is a relationship maybe between those complexities that we talk about and nutrition, because that in the end is where we are going for, I suppose. Maybe also experience, we also go for experience, maybe. Good experiences, so the social construct itself. So how would we do that then? Maybe, any of you. Barbara?
Oh,
Yeah.
that's a hard one. Well,
no, but we don't have to find the answer, but I was just, this is so complex, that what we are talking about, right? And this is exactly why we should talk about it, because of the complexity.
I have days where I have no hope, and I have days where I have hope. And when I have hope is because I meet people like today who have solutions, and who can talk about those issues and do things with it in their different domains. And the days where I have no hope is where we are completely flooded with the pressure for eating, continuing to eat badly, or the pressure also that affects many activists who are trying to change the way things go on, for instance, with extractivism, which is not just mining. In France, since COVID, there has been a very strong movement called in French soulèvement de la terre, the rising up of the land or of the earth. And it consists in being extremely mobilized in small groups when necessary, at what is happening currently with many rivers, in big rivers in France, like the river Loire, for instance, where massive amount of water is drawn from the river Loire to put water, to spray water on huge cornfields. Now, with the drought that we had this summer, which is not the first one, and the general climate warming, it's a catastrophe to continue to grow corn in that way. It's a catastrophe not just for the land, but it's a catastrophe for all our economies. And it seems that the politicians don't understand, and the enterprises are only thinking day after day and not projecting in the future. So we need movements like the ones that exist now. To what actually happens in this movement in France is sometimes a sabotage of those mega bassins which draw all that water. Now, this means that after that there is a process of trial, but during which things are explained. And just recently, one of those groups was released because the way this equipment was set up by the huge corn enterprise was not legal. So there are many venues to try to stop that, and it's on the grassroots. And then there is the other level, which is, I think, for our countries here in Europe, the European Union, where some norms should be changed.
Thank you.
No, but Hicham, from my perspective, as an answer to your question, I mean, I think first of all, we shouldn't be so occupied with the system we disagree with. So we shouldn't lose much of our energy disagreeing. We should focus on our own movement. We should focus on the fact that we are here now talking about it, and above all, continue to not be frightened by a system or that's global and that looks as if there is nothing that we can do. There is little we can do, which is humbling, but there is also locally much we can do. And I really believe in continuing to nourish those real relationships between parties, regionally, that can actually make a difference in our landscapes, to summarize it. And I think that's actually what we're doing. Seeing that grow, seeing all the walls that we continue to hit, but also the fact that we do, if we look back only 1 year of the things that I think revolving around our local food culture have been able to do, then there is progress, and more people are interested in this, and maybe are realizing that flavor, taste, and feeding yourself well, nutrition are related. Relearning that is all of the activities that are happening over the course of this festival are steps forward.
And I also wanted to add that from this perspective of kind of look at what is happening and look at what is changing, it also reminded me very much of the concept of reading for difference from diverse economies. So diverse economies is a research stream, let's say, which tries to shed light on things that are already happening and that, if amplified, can create change in the world, but that, generally speaking, have been overlooked a bit. So one of the things they do is by putting an economic value on unpaid labor, for example, we can emphasize how important this is to keep our system going instead of taking it for granted. And funnily enough, or oddly enough, in a very similar way, there are actually also initiatives to start valuing, putting an economic value, the intangible benefits that you can get as a corporate company even, the sustainability efforts that you do. So there are also initiatives to kind of be able to, let's say, translate sustainability benefits to corporate speak so that you can tell other companies that it's good to do this. So you do also see some movements towards sustainability, even in the field of food industry, even in the field of the corporate world. And I think that this is a hopeful prospect. Now, I'm not going to say it's perfect. I'm not going to say it's all the way there, but it is progress. And I really believe in looking for progress and not perfection. Although I stole that phrase from my transformative learning teacher, so gotta give credit where it's due. And I really do also think that there's a lot of people who are very motivated to work on that and to make it happen. So to really shift to a large-scale, more sustainable system. And another point of hope is that you do see sometimes that there's new policies in the European Union, for example, which can also partially force that growth towards sustainability. So, for example, I think it's called the Deforestation Act, that you need to be able to prove that within your production chain, no deforestation took place. And this is something that currently is being proposed and slowly being put into motion, and I think that can also have a far-reaching impact globally. So I think all of those are kind of hopeful signs. We do need to keep talking about it and keep acting towards it. Yeah. But we can create a better world by taking these steps.
Yeah, Barbara. Yeah, Barbara, go ahead.
I generally agree with what you say, but we must always be very careful, because in that general trend of recognizing sustainability, of course, it's a question of economical interest for big companies to continue to make money. And in some cases, it's called greenwashing. And it can be very discouraging. It was actually denounced during the COP 2015 in Paris, when there was 200 delegates from indigenous communities across the world. And there was a program presented by 4 Aboriginal people from Australia about the necessity of doing those famous small bushfires against big bushfires, which affect also the growth of food and be it vegetable or animal. And this was presented. It was the only indigenous group that was allowed to speak to the governments of the world, and it was presented then as a supermodel, because it's funded. It's been funded for several years now by United Nations, and it's called the READ Plus programs. And what this does is, indeed, it protects some places, and it recognizes sustainability in the things that you do, just like bushfires have making this management of fire in Australia has considerably dropped the emanations of bad carbon. And in exchange for that, the company who funds this kind of ventures is allowed to, for the equivalent, to destroy another place elsewhere. So it's a bit perverse. So, but it depends on the cases, and it means that you always have to look at it.
Yeah, the offset market. One more thing, and then I'll go. There's a reason why this kind of discussion takes place in the Art Academy, at least for me, because whatever we do takes place in the cultural realm. When you look at the indigenous situation, much of the stories or the ways in people knew what to do and how to do it were transferred through stories. So maybe this connection of looking at leadership might also be tackled through how could we tell the other story, or how could we use storytelling, or how could we use the cultural element in order to reveal this complexity or to share the complexity. Is this something? Because there is the cultural aspect, definitely. So I just wanted, then I'll give it back.
There was a while ago with the Rural Sociology group at Wageningen University, where I also did my graduation project. There was, for me, a very inspiring project where a number of the PhDs who had done researches on either kind of local food or art and localities and localism and all of these things, they joined forces to write a bundle of short children's stories to bring about a changed world. So, for example, a story about human more than human relationships, where a small child becomes friends with an owl and a tree and things like that, or a story about the exploitation of the land and how to regenerate the land. And they really took their own PhD research, so 4 years of expertise onto a very specific topic with the aim of making the world a better place, essentially. That's the best way to sum up all of their researches. There were 25 of them, I believe. And then they turned that knowledge into short stories. And yeah, it's a beautifully illustrated book. I found it very inspiring. So these kinds of collaborations also between art and science can be incredible. They can be incredibly inspiring and motivating as well. Yeah. I just wanted to give this example.
No, with Hicham, I mean, it's all culture, in the sense that that's why we focus on flavor and not on nutrients. Nutrients is not culture; that's the analysis. But flavor is is our like bodily interpretation that is then shared and reinforced, basically. So I think that they're like actively working on also the arguments that we rationally cannot convey, but that, or the stories that we rationally cannot convey, but that we can, that artists sometimes, yeah, do have access to sort of other parts of what forms our convictions and our habits, that there it is so important that also that sort of artistic work is being done in our cultural context to bring about that transformation. And that sort of, I think we all, yeah, do collectively, whether it's political work, whether it's work in the kitchen, on the farm, or here, but it are all those relationships that bring about collective change and also help rebuilding that complexity, basically. Because it's so easy to break it down under the forces that we've been talking about. It's hard to build it up, but yeah.
One really minor thing about that. Nutrients are very much scientific research, but the way we value different nutrients are also cultural. I would like to point that out because, for example, for a while it was really bad to eat eggs because it was terrible for your cholesterol. Then we figured out, oh wait, actually there's different kinds of cholesterol, and some of them give risk of cardiovascular disease, but some of them actually don't and actually protect you. So, you know, it's not unequivocally terrible to have a higher cholesterol level. It depends on the kind. And with that, what we think of as good nutrients and bad nutrients is really cultural. Just look at the cholesterol example, but also the rise of superfoods and the rise of incredible amounts of interest in antioxidants. Like now people keep being like, oh, it's full of antioxidants, it must be great. 20 years ago, people didn't care about antioxidants. So so which nutrients are considered as good and important is very culturally determined. And if you're from a place where starvation is, for example, an issue, then having high calorie foods is considered better, because the idea of what should a body be and what should a body look like is also, again, geographically, historically, and culturally diverse. That was the side note of nutrients can be culture.
Yeah. Does anyone else want to add something to that?
Oh, I thought we were going to finish, but
yeah, I think time-wise we're pretty much.
There's one question in the back.
I absolutely agree with what has been told.
One question.
Okay, last question. Okay, we don't worry about time. Chef said that. There you go. I wanted to ask a question about, well, maybe it's also to the two of you as well, but about reclaiming taste, because this question of reclaiming tastes suggests this need to return somehow to something before. But as the climate changes, it changes what's feasible to grow on our lands. So I wanted to give an example of, recently I've been working with farmers from Reading University, and they share land with one of the biggest supermarkets in the UK. And they're very aware that over the coming years, wheat is going to be harder to grow in the UK, and so they are actively growing multiple crops in a similar way to, I think, how Reinier works, but with crops that grow at a lower height and then at a higher height, so that they can farm more efficiently in the land. And through that, they are trying to
changed the flour makeup in really cheap white bread, which is what a lot of people in the UK depend on. You know, in the borough where I live, 45% of the kids live below the poverty line. They're really dependent on these cheap, mass-produced foods through the supermarket chains. So when we're talking about taste, a lot of it has been from actually quite an elite cultural perspective. But how do we change taste on a mass market perspective? Bearing in mind, I think you used this word of like manipulation, like, you know, since the Columbian Exchange, our diets have been manipulated through market profitability. But how do we now manipulate that drive for taste that will be able to create a sustainable farming future as climates change, so that the foods that we maybe traditionally would have been acclimatized to will be changing. So this historic taste will have to change.
Maybe very, or as briefly as, I mean, it's the most challenging part of bringing about change in the way in which we eat, because I mean, if I speak for myself, I'm not reaching the group that I like, that I hope to reach like most urgently with the things that I grow. The most people that buy my vegetables are already eating quite well. So how do you convince that group? I think one of the or part of the answer is that we should start including the like all of the costs into of a production and sort of the production of our food, but also the health consequences that they have and that we bear socially and environmentally into the products we eat. And then you will see that many of the products that we now consider cheap might turn out to be much more expensive. Yeah, and then the question is whether all food prices will rise and whether we will make all foods inaccessible. So yeah, helping everyone to, or people to, helping that food to be. I mean, those are. That's a larger problem of bringing up, making sure that there is nobody on or below that line of poverty in which they have a hard time having access to food, which will also in the upcoming months be more and more of a reality for many families, which is deeply worrying. Yeah, that is, I think, of really incorporating the cost also of the healthcare that comes with eating very unhealthy diets. Yeah, and education and all the rest. But
what you're saying, once you said you don't like sort of gardeners, you know, just hobby gardeners. But I mean, could we teach them to grow their own food then?
I think so. Absolutely. I mean, so community.
That could be sort of a solution to this, because otherwise.
But even that is often a privilege if you work. Yeah.
Come sit here. Come, Sophie. Let's have a discussion.
You know, if it's like I'm from London, you know, like it's not an option for people to grow their own food.
Space. So space is a problem.
Yeah, but also energy. If you're working a number of jobs, if you're raising kids, if you're already struggling to keep your family going, if you have a chronic illness, if you have any form of disability, essentially, if you are anybody but a privileged, able-bodied, young and healthy person, it is not realistic for you to grow enough food for you to be self-sustaining. It can be a nice way to connect people to nature, and in that, it is inherently valuable. However, I think a way to make the food healthier that is accessed the most by these groups. So, for example, think of the white bread. I would say look at specific nutrient deficiencies. That this is a very technocratic approach, I'm sorry, but it does work at a scale. Look at the specific nutrient deficiencies that are being caused by that diet and specific health issues there. Then try to adapt the formulation of the bread itself in a way that still keeps it like acceptable for people. And I know this is horrific for people who really want more whole foods and a closer, shorter line of connection to food. But I say do it both. So, and add more fibers into the bread at a slow pace so it becomes accessible, so it becomes a little bit healthier. So both do this incremental change within the food industry and shift to a different food system, because it is not feasible to pick one perfect solution and to say, we'll go for this perfect solution and do nothing else. I would say really just try to go at it at every different level possible. And I know the food industry is generally seen as very evil, but they do actually also try to do some health improvement and sustainability improvement issues. I have some friends working in it, so yeah. They're really doing their best to make it better.
The example of the white bread is that it's what a lot of people depend on for, but that it's the wheat is not going to be sustainable in the UK, so they have to be introducing soy and beans into that flour, which isn't to people's taste traditionally.
That is true, but that is one of the initiatives that people are looking into a lot, actually. So there's a lot of initiatives as well in kind of trying to, instead of, for example, in the Netherlands, instead of having like a meat-based thing that you put on bread, instead using a legume-based thing that you put on bread. Well, soy, it needs to be imported into the Netherlands, so how about making tempeh from lupin instead, which you can grow locally. You can create economic incentives for farmers to grow lupin in a sustainable system. If you can then ferment it in the right way into tempeh, or you can process it into other edible foods, you actually can create small-scale, really interesting incentives in a cooperation with also food technological research. And yeah, this is not the most popular message in agroecological systems, for example, as well, but I really do think that there is hope for these collaborations and there is hope for that to change. But yes, you're right, it's a horribly thorny problem. Yeah, I don't have an answer. But
I mean, we already know, yeah, and I'm going to give it back. We already know that relating to collapse, which we're heading to, we are already making the calculation between emissions output and carbohydrate input. So, so basically CO2 and carbs, right? So, especially for if you talk about starvation, you need more carbohydrate food, right? So it needs to be more nutritious in that sense. And you know, so I find it super scary, to be honest. I mean, then if yeah, this could be an answer, but for me, it's super scary. So that in fact speaks of the opposite of what we're speaking here now, right?
Barbara, did you want to say or to add something?
Oh, no, I really regret that I'm not with you there in that room to continue the discussion, but I am very sorry I have to leave because I thought that we were supposed to finish earlier, so I have another commitment.
And you're totally right. We were supposed to finish earlier.
Yeah, but it would be great to go with you, continue the discussion also with a good taste of local drink and food and so on. But I really enjoyed sharing all the ideas with you, and it's a fantastic initiative. And what I keep in mind is, and I would like to read actually, if it's available in English, those stories that you were talking about, the 25 PhD students who turned into novels for children, the result of their research. It's fantastic. It's the new generation that will save the world.
We could email...
After all the mistakes we did.
We could email to everyone that's joined like a few of these books and writers that have been mentioned. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Then we could share this. Yeah.
Is it okay if I disconnect and you
yes,
continue?
Yes, definitely.
Thank you, Barbara. Okay.
Thank you so much, Barbara. I think we need to close as well. I just wanted to mention briefly that we have a children's program on Saturday, during which we'll also showcase a screening which is about children growing vegetables. I know that this is just a small way of approaching this problem, but it is a step. And next to that, I wanted to thank, Barbara, Reinier, and Suzi, as well as the technique. We are continuing with the program at 5 o'clock. After that, we'll have bites and drinks. These bites will be a collection of what we grow in the vegetable garden here ourselves. We have a tremendous amount of grapes. And from Reinier, and also from Wim, who's not here today. So you can actually taste these vegetables that we've been talking about, and some local drinks. And I hope you'll stick around for the screening, which is next, and also free of charge. So, thank you all.